Number Fay Act. The legend begins Fay. The dust had settled on 1,000 movie sets. But the war between two legends had just begun. In the golden hills of Hollywood, where dreams were forged in celluloid and broken hearts, two men stood like monuments against the dying light of the American frontier. One was the Duke, John Wayne, the towering symbol of everything. The Old West represented honor, courage, and an unshakable moral code. The other was the man with no name, Clint Eastwood, the steely-eyed gunslinger who rode into town with a different kind of justice, one that questioned everything the Duke held sacred. They never faced each other in a movie, but their real-life feud became the stuff of Hollywood legend. A clash of titans that would echo through the canyons of cinema history long after their final scenes were shot. It began with a handshake, as all great betrayals do. The year was 1966. The Western genre was changing, and change always brought conflict. John Wayne had been the undisputed king of the frontier for nearly 3 decades. His weathered face had become synonymous with American heroism. Every draw of his gun, every tip of his hat, every slow drawl of Pilgrim had carved his legacy deeper into the cultural bedrock of a nation that desperately needed its heroes to be simple, noble, and unbreakably strong. But the world was shifting. Vietnam raged in distant jungles. Young Americans questioned authority. The old certainties crumbled like ancient adobe in a desert storm, and into this uncertainty rode Clint Eastwood. He came from the spaghetti westerns of Italy, where morality was as murky as a dried-up watering hole, where heroes killed without remorse, and where justice was served cold like revenge. His poncho-clad stranger was everything Wayne's characters were not: morally ambiguous, emotionally distant, and devastatingly effective. Where Wayne represented the myth of the noble cowboy, Eastwood embodied its death. The industry whispered. The critics compared. The box office told its own brutal truth. Audiences were hungry for this new kind of Western hero. Wayne felt it like a bullet to the chest, slow, painful, and ultimately fatal. Number Fay Act II. The man behind the gun, Fay behind the legendary personas, lived two men who couldn't have been more different, yet whose destinies were tragically intertwined. Marion Morrison, the man who became John Wayne, had built his empire on the foundation of American values. To him, movies weren't just entertainment, they were moral instruction manuals for a generation. Every film was a sermon delivered from horseback, every character a reflection of the man he believed America needed to see in its heroes. Wayne's dressing room was a shrine to patriotism. American flags, military commendations, letters from soldiers who found courage in his films. He carried the weight of an entire nation's heroic ideals on his shoulders, and the burden was crushing him. At 60 years old, he felt the ground shifting beneath his boots. Movies should mean something, Wayne once told a reporter, his voice heavy with conviction. They should teach young folks about honor, about doing what is right, even when it is hard. But Clint Eastwood saw things differently. Clinton Eastwood Jr. was a jazz lover, a filmmaker's filmmaker, an artist who understood that the world had grown too complex for simple morality tales. His characters didn't save the day. They survived it. They didn't restore order. They imposed their own. In the ruins of classical Hollywood, Eastwood was building something new, something honest about the darkness that lived in every man's heart. Eastwood's approach was methodical, almost scientific. Where Wayne relied on charisma and natural presence, Eastwood studied every angle, every shadow, every subtle movement of his eyes. He understood that less could be more, that silence could be louder than any speech about justice and honor. The difference wasn't just philosophical, it was generational. Wayne represented the America that had won World War II, while Eastwood spoke to the America that was losing Vietnam. And in Hollywood, there could be only one sheriff. The first crack in their relationship appeared at a Directors Guild screening in 1968. Wayne, magnificent in his tuxedo, held court near the bar, regaling younger actors with stories from Monument Valley. Eastwood entered quietly, as was his way, dressed simply but elegantly. The room seemed to hold its breath. Wayne noticed him first. Their eyes met across the crowded room, two gunslingers sizing each other up. Wayne's smile was warm but forced, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Clint," Wayne nodded, his voice carrying that familiar authority. "Duke," Eastwood replied, his own greeting measured and careful. They spoke for exactly 7 minutes and 30 seconds. A witness later said you could have heard a pin drop in Monument Valley. They discussed the weather, upcoming projects, mutual acquaintances. What they didn't discuss hung between them like smoke from a recently fired gun. Wayne's final words were prophetic. "Hollywood's big enough for all kinds of cowboys, I reckon." Eastwood's response was quieter, maybe, but the frontier's getting smaller every day. That night, Wayne returned to his Bel Air mansion and stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face that looked back was still strong, still commanding, but lined with worry. He saw something in his eyes he'd never seen before, doubt. Eastwood drove his simple sedan back to his modest Carmel home and sat on his deck listening to Miles Davis as the Pacific crashed against the rocks below. He felt no satisfaction in the evening's encounter. If anything, he felt sadness, the melancholy that comes with watching legends fade. Number Fay Act III. The untold chapter, Fay What Happened Next, was carefully hidden from the public, buried beneath layers of studio politics and carefully crafted press releases. But the truth, like blood in the dust, always finds a way to surface. The incident occurred on the 15th of November, 1969, at a small ranch outside Sedona, Arizona. A mutual friend, director George Stevens, Jr., had organized a private gathering, a weekend retreat for Hollywood's Western family, as he called it. The guest list read like a who is who of the frontier film world: Wayne, Eastwood, James Stewart, Henry Fonda, Maureen O'Hara, and a handful of directors and producers. The setting was perfect for what would become known in whispered Hollywood circles as The Last Stand. The ranch house was rustic but comfortable, with a massive stone fireplace and walls lined with authentic artifacts from the American frontier. Outside, red rock formations caught the dying light, painting the landscape in shades of amber and crimson. It should have been peaceful, but peace was the last thing on anyone's mind that weekend. The tension had been building for months. Eastwood's, the good, the bad, and the ugly, had redefined what a Western could be, while Wayne's true grit represented everything traditional about the genre. Critics were calling it a generational changing of the guard. Box office numbers supported the theory. Wayne arrived first, as was his custom. He believed in punctuality as strongly as he believed in justice. Eastwood came later, after sunset, his headlights cutting through the desert darkness like twin searchlights. The first evening passed cordially enough. War stories were shared, old friendships renewed. Wayne, ever the performer, entertained the group with his legendary John Ford impressions. Eastwood listened politely, offering occasional smiles, but remaining characteristically reserved. But on Saturday night, everything changed. The group had gathered around the fireplace after dinner. Whiskey flowed freely. Good, honest American bourbon that warmed the body and loosened the tongue. The conversation had turned, inevitably, to the changing nature of Western films. "The problem with these new pictures," Wayne said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades atop the Hollywood mountain, "is they don't believe in heroes anymore. They think being dark makes them deep." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Everyone in the room knew who he was talking about. Eastwood, who had been studying the fire as if reading prophecies in its flames, finally spoke. "Maybe the problem isn't with the new pictures, Duke. Maybe the problem is that the old heroes don't work anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Henry Fonda shifted uncomfortably in his chair. James Stewart found sudden interest in his bourbon glass. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter. Wayne turned to face Eastwood fully, his bulk imposing even while seated. "And what kind of heroes do work, in your estimation?" "The kind that don't pretend the world is simpler than it is," Eastwood replied, his voice steady as stone. "The kind that do what needs doing without speeches about honor and justice." Wayne's jaw tightened. "You think honor is just something for speeches. I think honor is what a man does when nobody's watching, not what he says when everybody is." The exchange continued for 20 minutes, each man choosing his words like ammunition, each response calculated to wound. Wayne accused Eastwood of cynicism, of poisoning young minds with moral ambiguity. Eastwood suggested that Wayne's philosophy was outdated romanticism, dangerous in its simplicity. "You make movies like the world owes you something," Eastwood said, his voice barely above a whisper but cutting through the room like a blade. "Like being American makes you automatically right." Wayne stood then, all 6 foot, 4 of him rising like a monument to righteous anger. "This country made you rich, boy. This country gave you everything you have, and you repay it by tearing down everything it stands for." Eastwood remained seated, but his eyes never left Wayne's face. "I repay it by showing it the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable." What happened next depends on who you ask. Some say Wayne challenged Eastwood to step outside like men. Others claim Eastwood suggested they settle their differences the old-fashioned way. What everyone agrees on is that 2 of Hollywood's greatest legends came within seconds of throwing punches like common saloon brawlers. James Stewart, bless his diplomatic soul, intervened before blood could be shed. "Gentlemen," he said in that distinctive drawl, "we're all on the same side here. We all love this country, and we all love Western pictures. Let's not forget that." The moment passed, but something irreparable had been broken. Wayne and Eastwood didn't speak again for the rest of the weekend. When Eastwood left early Sunday morning, Wayne watched from his window as the taillights disappeared into the desert dawn. He never saw Clint Eastwood in person again. Number, Fay Act the Fourth. The legacy lives on Fay years past like seasons in Monument Valley. Inevitable, eternal, and tinged with both beauty and melancholy. Wayne continued making films, but the magic seemed dimmed. His movies still performed well, still touched audiences, but there was something different now, a defensive quality, as if he were arguing with critics who weren't even in the room. The Shootist, his final film, felt like an epitaph, though no one knew it at the time. Eastwood's star continued its inexorable rise. Dirty Harry proved he could carry modern roles. Unforgiven would later prove he understood the Western tradition better than anyone gave him credit for. But success couldn't fill the hollow space left by that broken relationship. In 1979, cancer finally caught up with the Duke. As news of his illness spread through Hollywood, many expected gestures of reconciliation. Final meetings, last words shared between legends. They never came. Eastwood learned of Wayne's death through a studio executive, the news delivered between discussions of shooting schedules and budget meetings. He excused himself, drove to Point Reyes, and walked alone along the California coast for hours. A journalist later asked him about Wayne's passing. Eastwood's response was typically minimal. He was a movie star, when being a movie star meant something. They don't make them like that anymore. But what the journalist didn't see was what Eastwood did when he thought he was alone. He kept a single photograph in his office, a promotional still from Red River, Wayne magnificent on horseback against a vast sky. Sometimes, late at night, when the rest of the world slept, Eastwood would study that photograph and wonder what might have been. In 1992, Eastwood directed Unforgiven, his meditation on violence, heroism, and the mythology of the American West. Many critics noted its similarities to Wayne's worldview, despite its darker tone. In the film's climactic scene, William Money speaks words that could have come from either legend's mouth: "We all got it comin', kid." After winning the Academy Award for Best Picture, Eastwood was asked about the film's themes. His answer surprised everyone. "I suppose I learned something from the Duke after all. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is tell a story about what it costs to be a hero." The reporter pressed him, "Do you think Wayne would have approved of the film?" Eastwood paused for a long moment, his eyes distant as old memories. "I think he would have understood it. Whether he would have approved, that is between him and the desert now." Today, decades after both legends have ridden into their final sunset, their feud remains one of Hollywood's great unresolved mysteries. Film scholars debate its significance. Biographers search for hidden clues. Fans take sides as if the argument were still raging. But perhaps the real truth is simpler than all the theories and speculation. Perhaps two giants of American cinema, each carrying the weight of an entire genre on their shoulders, simply found themselves on opposite sides of history's great turning point. Perhaps their conflict wasn't personal at all, but cosmic. The inevitable collision between myth and reality, between what America wanted to be and what it was becoming. In the end, both men were right. Wayne was correct that heroes matter, that stories should inspire, that there is nobility in fighting for what you believe in. Eastwood was equally correct that heroes are human, that inspiration can come from truth, and that fighting sometimes means admitting when your beliefs need to change. Their legacy lives not in their conflict, but in their contradiction together. They defined the full spectrum of American heroism, from the shining ideal to the gritty reality. Without Wayne, we lose our aspirations. Without Eastwood, we lose our honesty. And in some alternate universe, on a movie set that exists only in dreams, two legends shake hands and smile, finally understanding that there was room enough for both kinds of heroes in the infinite expanse of the American imagination. But in our universe, the mystery endures. What was truly said that night in Sedona? What final thoughts did Wayne have about his successor? What regrets did Eastwood carry into his own legendary status? The desert keeps its secrets, the legends ride on, and somewhere in the space between myth and memory, the greatest Western story of all time remains unfinished, waiting for someone brave enough to ride into that final sunset and discover what really happened when two giants faced each other for the last time. In Monument Valley, they say, if you listen carefully to the wind through the red rocks, you can still hear the echo of that conversation. Two voices, forever locked in debate about the soul of America itself. The frontier may be closed, but some arguments never end. They just fade into legend.